And I have to say, I walked away with the impression that the Lebanese, wow, like a really talented population. And I realize internally it's very fractured in a lot of ways, but the commonality seems to be that people seem well educated and smart and ambitious and resourceful, right? They're operating sometimes under really extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And by the way, we also see that reflected in the United States because the entire kind of makeup of the population of Lebanon has its reflection in the Lebanese American community in the United States, where they make, frankly, very good citizens. So I left with this kind of pain that here's this very talented population living in a really difficult political environment where, on the one hand, a lot of decisions are out of their own hands because of foreign powers that are meddling in their country or the rise of an Iranian supported militia that is causing so much damage to the country. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, like a political system that also seems to have failed their public year after year. Um, the same individuals who you would meet them individually and they would be wonderful people, but collectively they've historically been unable to bring their country around to the sort of decent governance that I think most Lebanese want. And I mean, I think that's where it needs to start. Figure out a way to channel the sheer talent of and resourcefulness of the Lebanese people. And the country has an opportunity now for the first time in a long time. And I mean, this gets into very, very political topics, but uh, an opportunity to develop a decent, prosperous, stable Lebanon free of the influences of countries like Iran or now thankfully gone, but Assad Syria or others. And I think in that there's this opportunity to thrive. But the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government need to rise above sectarianism and they need to rise above um, kind of individual interests, and they need to find a way to develop a government that represents all of the country.
What is your wish if, having lived in Lebanon for a couple of years and seen it under an ugly light, and where the advice is, hey, let us not think about religion or dependence or the individual and actually think about where we can go. If we were to play our cards right, what, in your hope and almost practical hope, can Lebanon represent in the next 4 to 5 years? And also, what can Saudi Arabia, if it plays its cards right, represent in the next 4 to 5 years? What could it look like?
I mean, Lebanon obviously can be this kind of engine of talent. And even in the messiest periods of Lebanon's history, it was still producing really smart university graduates, both from their own universities, but also Lebanese that were studying abroad, some of them going back to Lebanon, some of them working in the Gulf, some of them working in Europe or Africa or the United States. So this kind of engine of talent seems to be Lebanon's real um, kind of competitive advantage in the Middle East and more broadly. And I think that is something that Lebanon can't lose. Whatever happens, I think the ability to produce this human capital, I think, is the country's comparative advantage, and I think it will help Lebanon and it will help the Gulf. As you know, Lebanese have worked throughout Saudi and the Gulf for many, many decades, often thriving there in ways that they do better there than they would back in their own country. But I think it's a great advantage for Lebanese, and I hope they don't lose it.
And what about Saudi, going through an extraordinary transformation, social, um, yeah, cultural? Where could it be in 5 years if it plays its cards right, in a place where it's modernizing its entire country, but at the same time where it is still highly dependent on oil? And so, what could success look like, and what are the key levers to success for Saudi Arabia?
What the Saudis are doing, with Vision 2030 is sort of the overall kind of framework for it, I think is exactly right. And Vision 2030 is a lot of things, but at the root of it, one of the main things is it's trying to create a viable, prosperous economy in a post-fossil fuel world. So they recognize they have this extraordinary oil wealth, um, and what they want to do is take that wealth and invest it in a way for the day. And no one knows when that day is going to come. 50 years, who knows? When either the world runs out of oil or the world stops using oil, Saudi Arabia needs a viable economy. And they say, okay, let's invest that oil wealth today in industries that will serve us in the future. And I think sometimes people look at some of those investments on a short-term basis and say they don't really make sense. But I would advise people to step back and say, actually, these are very long-term investments. These aren't investments that they expect to pay off in a year or 2 years or 3 years. These are investments that they're making for 10, 20, 30, 40 years for a moment in the future where they really need this diversified economy. So I think that's a big piece of what they're trying to do. And to me, it makes all the sense in the world. The other piece of it, I think, is developing the human capital to kind of fuel that economy. So we talked about how Lebanon has historically been kind of an engine of human capital that's been exported all over the world, essentially. So Saudi Arabia recognizes that one of the things they have lots of oil, they have lots of wealth, but what they need is developing their human capital because that's the key to developing those industries into the future. So I think that also very kind of smart recognition. As the U.S. government, were kind of partnering with them in ways to help them develop their university system, their primary and secondary educational system, uh, helping partner with U.S. educational institutions to increase the kind of quality of education, ultimately, so that Saudi Arabia is also a producer of strong